Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Korean Americans for Political Action webinar entitled Korean Americans who are making state races matter. Hi, I'm Suki Kang, Chairman of the Board of Directors of CAPA. Today's webinar comes at an opportune time of another truly historic moment. Two of our panelists today will soon make history with new firsts. The first Korean American elected Lieutenant Governor of Hawaii, and the first Korean American woman elected to the New York State Assembly. Our other panelists have fascinating backgrounds and stories about their respective paths to becoming candidates for elected office. As a former mayor of Irvine, California, this webinar really resonates with me in particular because I have a shared experience with these panelists of being part of the Korean American political leadership pipeline. These panelists really brings to life CAPA's mission. CAPA was created as a nonpartisan, nonprofit with a mission to mobilize Americans of Korean descent nationwide to collectively exercise Korean American political leverage on issues affecting us in our democracy. So thank you so much, all the panelists, for taking your precious time out of your busy campaign schedule to join us today. In preparing the webinar, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Council of Korean Americans, CKA, the Korean American Coalition National Board, and the Korean American Association of Greater New York, CAGNY. On behalf of CAPA Board of Directors, we sincerely thank you all for your outstanding support collaborating for this event. We would also like to thank the presenting sponsor, H Mart, and gold sponsor BCD Tofu House for their generosity of sponsoring this webinar. And now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Kyung B. Yoon. Kyung is the president and co-founder of the Korean American Community Foundation, KACF, a leading funder of Korean and Asian American community organizations in the greater New York City area. Her previous experiences are in global development and media, as executive producer of television at the World Bank Institute. She was also a correspondent for WNYW Fox Channel 5, the first Korean American broadcast reporter in New York City. A trustee of the New York Foundation, Kyung is also immediate past board chair of Philanthropy of New York. So Kyung, thank you so much for serving as moderator. We are delighted to have you today. And at this time, I will turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Suki, for that kind introduction. And good evening, everyone. As Suki said, I'm the president and co-founder of the Korean American Community Foundation. And here in New York, for the past 20 years, our focus has been on advancing philanthropy and the economic security of the Korean American community. And this mission we see as being really linked to building our philanthropic power, but also our voice and our visibility and influence as Korean Americans. And of course, this also means political power. And that's why I'm so delighted to be moderating today's panel with Korean American trailblazers who are really making their mark on state government. I was thinking as I was preparing for this webinar that, like me, voters often get most energized, by the high-profile national races. And of course, the presidential elections, congressional elections, governor races, and so on. But it's so important to pay attention to who we are electing as state senators and assembly members, and these leaders who really run our states and control the budgets and policies that affect our schools and our housing and really our daily quality of life. And so I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to our distinguished panel today And I will kick it off by first introducing the Honorable Sylvia Luke, Hawaii State Representative. And she has served in the Hawaii House of Representatives since 1999 after immigrating to the US at the age of 9. And she recently won the Democratic primary for Lieutenant Governor of Hawaii back in August. Next is Georgia State Representative Sam Park, who has served in the Georgia State House since 2016. And Sam beat the Republican incumbent to become the first Asian American Democrat elected to the Georgia General Assembly. Sam was born and raised in Georgia, and he has a JD from Georgia State University. And he currently represents District 101 and is running for District 107. Now, Grace Lee, my fellow New Yorker, is a nominee for the New York State Assembly. This is her second campaign, and she is teed up to become the first Korean American woman elected to New York State legislature, and the first Korean American. I guess actually the first Korean American woman. I guess we have Ron Kim. Now, Grace is a small business owner. She's a fireball. She's a community organizer. She's a proud mom of 3. And she co-founded a parent-led coalition that was fighting to clean up a toxic mercury site located in her neighborhood. And it's called Children First. Next is Gene Yoon, who is a nominee for California State Senate. And he's running against the California State's majority leader. Gene is originally from New Jersey, and he's, I think, every Korean parent's dream, Princeton undergrad, NYU Law School, and a technology executive. And last but not least is Sue Yu, who is a nominee for the California State Assembly. She's running in the district that was previously represented by the now Congresswoman Young Kim. And Sue came to the US at the age of 8 and grew up in a part of LA where her elementary school was 90% Latino, and she became fluent in Spanish in the process. And we are really delighted to be able to welcome her as well as all of the panelists. So I want to just kick it off with an opening question to all the panelists. I've just given the highlights of your great distinguished resumes. Can you share with us just one thing that's not on your resume that says more about you as a person versus you as a candidate for political office? And let's see who I'll pick on first. My fellow New Yorker, Grace Lee, why don't you start?
Oh, Kyung, thank you so much for hosting this tonight and for having us here. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Virtually and in person. I think that, you've touched on a lot. I would say, one of the things that happened to me during my candidacy is I got arrested. I got arrested protesting the jail in Chinatown. And, it just was something I think that, was our community has been fighting for it for a long time, and was something actually that I didn't expect to happen, and I learned a lot, from being an activist, to, and everything that's been going on in the Asian American community in New York, to really using my voice in a way that I wasn't really raised to. Had, done all the things my parents had told me to do and gone to good college and gotten an, MBA. But, this was really different, being grassroots and on the ground and realizing that as a mother, if I wanted to see a better future for my family and for my children, that we really needed to put a stake in the ground and make sure that, that our government was listening.
Thank you. So that reveals something about you as a person, Grace, that you have a rep sheet now.
Yeah.
You're willing to be arrested for your conviction. So
good trouble.
Jean, how about you? Tell us something that's not on your resume that tells us more about you as a person versus a candidate.
I'm going to pick up your comment about me being my parents' dream by saying that the reason I ended up going to Princeton is because I refused to apply to Harvard or Yale, and my my parents were bitterly upset about my decision to stay away from the only two colleges that they've ever heard of. They were so upset about Princeton. They were like, "What is this school? Just some school in New Jersey?" Uh, but I think that ties into the fact that what the answer I want to give here is that people often ask me why I decided to run for any kind of office after a 25-year career in finance and law. It seems like a quite a different step. And a lot of the answer just has to do with the age that I am now. I'm currently just past 50. And a lot of times you take an assessment of your life at that point, and you try to figure out what you're going to do with your remaining years. And my father died in 2019. And that kind of kicked off this period of me really reflecting upon not just my life, but his life, my mother's life, their journey from really being children in the Korean War to the kind of life that I have been able to enjoy here, not really even understanding the journey. I think I probably learned more about that type of history and what it meant to them in these last couple of years of running than I had my entire previous lifetime of living. So to me, this connection between politics and my Korean background is actually extremely alive, although it never really comes out in my campaign because honestly, 70% of my district is white, less than 5% is Asian. I mean, it's just not really a factor to even discuss, but it's something that I'm glad to talk about here with this audience.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going around the screen now, and Sylvia, you are next. If you could share with us something about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here, and I'm so honored to be a part of this forum. I'm even more excited when I can share the screen with my good friend Sam Park here. I've been in the State House for 24 years, but I look towards young leadership as inspiration and strength, and I see that in Sam and many of you folks. And it's as an old dog, they say in politics. After a while, you basically know how state works, and you've seen it all. But it's through people like Sam and trailblazers like others. I use it as motivation to continue to serve. For me, as I said, I've been in office for 24 years, last 10 years as chair of the Finance Committee. And as chair of the Finance Committee, you get to see everything, not just specific issues, but you basically run state government. And it provided me a significant amount of, I wouldn't say advantage, but expertise as we got into debates and forums and the things that I'm always encouraging other Korean Americans to run, because I think even in our state, we have significant number of Korean American who reside in the state, and we don't have enough representation throughout the nation. So I am always encouraged by others who are willing to take up this journey, because public service is hard. Just something little about myself. I met my husband when I was attending the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and we were both in student government together. And it's kind of that journey and partnership and the willingness to get into public service, which is really exciting for me. I think in student government, I was the first female president of Student Body Association in 10 years. And it was so invigorating for me to find out that the person who served 10 years ago, who was a female, was also Korean American. So you guys are stars, and you guys are trailblazers in so many ways. So it's an honor to be here, and mahalo.
Great, thank you so much. And next, I'll go to Sue. You. if you could tell us something that might not be on your resume, but could help us understand more about you as a person.
Sure, sure. Currently, I serve as a school board president. I'm a mom of 4 daughters and pastor's wife. I'm an MVP. I was MVP for volleyball, and I grew up in a heavily Latino community where I had to learn to fight at an early age. So I actually grew up fighting the cholas and cholos. There was an 18th Street gang down the street, and that's how I grew up. That's my background. I became a Christian when I was 13. And so you can tell that I'm a fighter, right? As a board member, I wasn't really deeply involved with politics, but early on during the LA riot, I came out on the Oprah Winfrey Show because Korean American did not have a voice then. And then that's when I learned, because at the time I was attending a theological seminary with my husband, and learned that the news, they manipulate and they lie, because they really turned that into like a race issue and blamed it on Korean merchants, which was so unfair. I was about to be on the rooftop with my machine gun, okay, to defend our Koreatown. I was so upset because our Koreatown was burnt down. Recently, last year, in September, I had to put my foot down against the CRT and the comprehensive sex ed, really sexualizing and, brainwashing our children. I'm an educator. I have Hagwon business for 30 years working with youth. I was a youth pastor. And I really had to deal with a lot of addiction and children suffering with moms. We cried together. And, with the liberal policies, it's just going down the wrong path. And I stood my foot down. I gave my opinion, and I was attacked as being a racist and a bigot. But unfortunately, I did not fit into that racist agenda, racist narrative, because I'm an immigrant. I grew up in the LA. I'm a woman. I'm a person of.
I'm trying to. I think what you're saying. Sorry to interrupt, but
I'm
about
sorry.
you
So that's
as a
who I
person
am.
is that you're a fighter, and that you don't back down, and that you learned a lot of good moves on this elementary school playground, right? Defending yourself. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. And then I'll go to Sam Park. If you could answer that question about what is it about you that may not be on the resume.
Thank you, Kyung. I'm also very happy to join and be here with everyone. Sylvia, congratulations. I look forward to your leadership in Hawaii. The state of Hawaii is blessed to have you continue to serve. And thank you for your kind words. I would also say, I think your leadership in terms of the longevity, but also the impact that you've been able to have on your state is also an inspiration to myself as well. So I look forward to many years of your continual service to the people of Hawaii. One thing that I think, I'll give you 2 things actually. One is that I'm an introvert. I never really imagined myself running for office or engaging in the political arena. For me, I thought politics was something inaccessible, something that I could never really be a part of, especially as a son of low-income immigrants, in which we were always trying to simply make ends meet. But my journey was really a reminder that 1, our democracy is alive and well, and that 2, we have an incredible amount of power, and we just have to understand and use it accordingly for ourselves, for our community, and for our country to ensure that hopefully we're moving in the right direction.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam. I'm going to turn now to my next question, which is kind of a landscape look at where are we in terms of our Korean American identities and our immigrant history and the emergence of a new generation of Korean Americans here in the United States. As we know that the majority of Korean immigration happened in the past, few decades, and really it's been, it's still the case that the majority of Koreans in the U.S. are first generation. And so this has meant maybe certain attitudes and perspectives have been dominant about what it means growing up and being of Korean descent. Expectations, we kind of touched on it, of like how our parents want us to behave, what is success. And, that old stereotype about parents who are pushing their children to be a doctor or a lawyer. And I think this isn't unique just to Koreans. I mean, I think it's typical of many immigrants. But with the Korean cultural overlay, this can take on like certain dimensions. So, but we're really seeing now, we're in the 21st century, and there's a new kind of broader paradigm of Korean identity that's emerging. We have biracial Korean Americans. We have many Korean American adoptees who've come of age. And against this backdrop, there are some newly emerging political candidate archetypes that seem to be going against the old grain as well. And the concept of progressive politics isn't necessarily associated with Koreans, especially the first generations. So are progressive Korean American candidates more likely to be successful in districts where there are little or no Korean constituents? I mean, I think those are interesting questions. So the question I'm going to direct it first to Sylvia Luke. I mean, Hawaii is such a multicultural state, and there are blended Asian ethnicities. I mean, it's more the norm, I think, than the exception. So does this mean that in running for a statewide office, that being of Korean descent maybe has less of a uniqueness to it? Since your last name is Luke, you certainly look to be Asian descent. And just how much of a challenge, if it is at all, has it been for you to appeal to different Asian and Pacific Islander communities?
Right. So let me address the first part, what you referenced in the beginning of your question. Korean immigration story is very unique. It's different from any other immigrant stories only because the Korean immigration timeline was halted by war and conflict in the Korean Peninsula. So you saw early immigration in early 1900, and then there was no immigration, and it started up again in 1960s. The problem that has caused, especially in Korean American communities, is there's a disconnect between the third generation Korean, and now they're going into fourth generation Korean compared to some of us. I'm a first generation, although I'm considered 1.5, like Sue and others as well. And it's hard to build sometimes consensus and a community because it has been separated by war. So even in Hawaii, where we don't have a dominant ethnic group, I think the highest amount of ethnic group is 30%. So it is a community where not one sector of ethnic background or racial background dominates the I guess the gender and race in the state. I think for all of us, Jean and Grace and others, even Sue comes from an area with a lot of Latinos. Jean, you don't represent predominantly Korean community. And Sam is an example of very little amount of Koreans live in his district. So I think for all of us, we were able to transcend the discussion beyond what's important just for the Korean community. But if you think about it, what's important for Korean community, it's the cost of living, it's housing, it's many of education, it's many of the issues that resonate among the general public. So I think the fact that you guys are all on the general election ballot is a testament that you're not only pulling from Korean Americans within your district, but you're appealing to the broader sector of the community.
I think that's right. And, you mentioned, Jean, that, Jean, you said yourself that you're running in this California State Senate district that is just overwhelmingly white. You said it's 70% and 20 3% Hispanic, I think. So how did you come to run in this district? I mean, well, maybe that's what you chose, but clearly being of Korean descent is not something that's going to help you, gain votes necessarily. But like, how do you identify yourself as you present yourself as a candidate?
Well, to the extent that there's any question about sort of cultural affiliation in my speaking, I make very clear that I feel that I'm an American. I mean, I was born in this country. I grew up with many of the same types of influences as any other peer in this country in the 70s and 80s. And I feel that to say that my identity culturally is as anything other than American just wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be truthful. And so that's pretty straightforward. And of course, an easy message in a district that's composed with the demographics that we just described here. But this, whether or not being Korean has anything to do with my race is a different question. I mean, my political race. Of course, it informs who I am as a person and how I think about government at all and how I think about values in a society at all, right? I mean, it's not very much of a step back we have to take to look at the world and see that the world is in a significant amount of trouble right now, right? And this is not just sort of normal bad times. These are the kind of times that we've not seen in terms of conflict across the planet. We haven't seen them since, 80 years ago, since really the end of the Korean War, but specifically with respect to war in Europe, we haven't seen that since the end of World War II. And the end of the American order is here, right? From World War II to approximately 2001, when the Twin Towers came down. That was the era of American peace. And ever since the early 2000s, the world order has been shifting, is changing. Nobody really knows what's going on. We see the rise of China geopolitically, and now war in Europe again. So these huge historical cycles, to me, cause me to look at the role of Korea, that last little bit of conflict after World War II, one in which, to the extent anyone is willing to say that there's a just war, such a thing as a just war, most people will agree that World War II was that. And most people, if they know anything about the Korean War at all, are willing to grant that, that war, despite today's interpretation of imperialism and other types of Western influence that might be unwelcome, that war was the greatest demonstration that we can see in real time over the last 70, 80 years about what the difference would be in a region that is dominated by the American sphere of influence versus, of course, the Soviet and then Chinese sphere of influences. And we see that conflict playing out greater and greater right now, and Korea remains the hot point for this conflict, possibly the hottest point in the world. I mean, you've got Ukraine, of course, going on. You've got always the Middle East going on. But as geopolitical tensions rise everywhere, Korea is going to continue to become one of the most fraught areas in the entire world. And we all take pride as Korean background expatriates who, in the success that our motherland has had over the last years, decades since the Korean War. We take an enormous amount of pride in that. I don't think that many people very easily or quickly follow up that pride with the acknowledgement that it has to have been the case that American influence, American intertwined culture, Americans just sort of views towards capitalism and democracy that really helped the ability of Korea to be able to become what it has been on the world stage today with respect to culture and economic influence. So Korea and the United States have got this incredibly tightly interwound relationship that is based in the value of freedom and democracy. And I hate to use rah-rah language, but it is freedom and democracy paid with the price of blood, for real. And that is what's going on now in Ukraine. And that's what's going on now on all sorts of places in the world. And
I'm sorry, this is a really good point, and they're very
so
valid. And
I'll end it.
To that. No, we're going to actually, we're going to be getting to that more. I think the question that I was asking was around Korean American identity for yourself. I mean,
Oh, so let me one
just
sentence bring it back
Yeah,
down.
I think it is that you and I, we might see ourselves as American, but sometimes how do others see you sometimes as a candidate, and where does the Korean American identity play? I think that was sort of more the question.
I'm sorry, I took what seems like a discursion around that question, but it really is the core of the answer, because people ask me, hey, what's it like? You get up in front of these rural crowds, you get up in these crowds of farmers, of veterans, and don't they say to you, you ain't from around here, boy? Do I get that kind of vibe? And I'll admit it, absolutely, when I stand up. But the moment I open my mouth and start talking about what I believe and what I'm motivated and where my parents come from, and how I feel that, honestly, again, the American military gave my parents an opportunity to do what they did, and which allowed me to have the opportunity to stand in front of any audience I'm talking to. I talk explicitly about my Korean background in a way that reaffirms, both for me and for the audience, my Americanness. And it's true and it works. So that's a nice combination.
Thank you. Sue, do you have any comment?
Well, it's pretty exciting that we do live in a time, like in California, Asians make up 15% and the Latinos make up 45. We're like more than 60% together. And I come from a very Korean, I'm very bicultural and bilingual. And Koreans just, that whole voting process is getting there, but it's still new. Only 25% voted in the primary. So it's a different culture here. But, my message to my fellow Koreans are this: we are no longer immigrants. I didn't start voting until like 13 years ago. I was naturalized, became a citizen in college. So the Korean American identity is that, and I applaud everyone in this room, regardless of the party, because we have stepped up to serve our community, because this is public servanthood. And since we're not immigrants anymore, we have to clean up the mess also. We have to be responsible in cleaning up the mess. And one thing that I do want to say is that as a Korean American, I have a very strong Korean heritage and Korean identity. And I know the history, which I learned through my parents and dramas, all that, right? I mean, I came when I was like 8 years old. I appreciate the freedom and the sacrifices made for the freedom. And as a Korean American in this day and age, in California especially, I see a vision that, God will raise up leaders to serve this great state and our country. And yes, first Korean American president is very doable, very possible, because we came to America with a purpose. And I think that for me, I am excited to pave the road for our young people, because we need to clean up the mess. We need to rebuild this great nation. And, we need to unite with other cultures and ethnic groups. And that is our Korean American identity. And just one more thing. When I came, nobody knew where Korea was in 1974. Today, Korea, everybody knows. My husband always says he's so proud that Korea is become one of the top nations in such a short period of time. And I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thanks to, thank you very much.
And, you mentioned the sort of paving the way for the younger generation. And I want to talk about that, we're seeing, I mean, it is a stereotype, but many, if not most, first generation Koreans in the US do identify as politically conservative. But then we're seeing sort of a younger generation of Koreans, 1.5, the second generation, really, starting to overwhelmingly identify as Democrats. Large part, there's stands on social justice issues, climate change, diversity, equity, inclusion. Even more so, I think, since the last presidential election. And so I want to go to Sam, as a second generation Korean American representing a state house district with many first generation Korean Americans, how do you bridge the generational divide as a candidate that some first generation Koreans may see as maybe too progressive?
So I really appreciate this conversation about identity, about leadership, about character. Coming from a state like Georgia, where we have a long history of racism and segregation, and with Asian American immigration being relatively new, where compared to California and Hawaii, first generation of Asian Americans really came over in the late 70s and early 80s. And so there is a disconnect, not just between Asian American history, including the Chinese Exclusion Act that resulted in the nadir of Asian American immigration, in which Asian Americans or anybody who looked of Asian American descent were prohibited from becoming US citizens, to the shared struggle with African Americans and the 400 years of hardship that they suffered, and the continual effort to fight for representation, in which I think which is in understanding that history, a reason why a lot of younger Asian Americans, especially in the South, in Georgia being the cradle of the civil rights movement, are leaning more toward the Democratic Party, as a Democratic Party in its current manifestation is more representative of democratic rights, of human rights, fighting for the individual ability for every single person for their vote to count, especially in a state like Georgia, where we've seen intentional efforts to make it more difficult for people of color to vote, where we've seen racially discriminatory redistricting enacted over the past 12 months that diluted the political power of Black, Asian, and Hispanics, that targeted and tried to unseat the first Asian American state senator elected in Georgia in 2020. And so I think in understanding our history and where we currently are, and the desire to live up to those American values of wanting to ensure individual liberty, equality, and justice for all, I think a lot of younger Asian Americans are identifying themselves as Democrats and progressives, as they currently see the Democratic Party as more representative of that vision of seeking the American dream. And I think when it comes to the specific issues, especially in a state like Georgia, I don't necessarily know if I'd call myself a progressive. I think when it comes to especially public policy, it's a matter of common sense issues and a common sense approach to addressing issues, where if something's broken, fix it. If something's not broken, leave it alone. In the state of Georgia, and I think Representative or Lieutenant Governor Luke mentioned this, healthcare, education, these are all issues, gun safety. These are all issues that a lot of first generation Korean Americans and Asian Americans and conservative immigrant communities care about. In a state like Georgia, we have one of the highest uninsured rates in the nation. We have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the nation. We've underfunded public education by billions of dollars over the past 2 decades. And, we have the epidemic of gun violence that has been made worse by the loosening of gun safety laws. And so I think a lot of folks across the political spectrum really just want government to do its job, to provide for the basic necessities so that all of us have an opportunity to pursue our American dream.
Great, thank you. Let me turn to Grace. This question must resonate for you as well. I know you describe yourself as a progressive, and so just curious your take.
Well, I think Sam makes a lot of great points. Just to give some context to my district, I'm the Democratic nominee for Lower Manhattan, which includes the Financial District, Chinatown, and the Lower East Side. So a really incredibly diverse district of immigrant communities, a Latino community, a very rich, historical neighborhood for the Latino community, for the Chinese community, but still predominantly white, and not one that has a lot of Korean Americans. But as Sam said, I think that people really want government to work for them. And when I talk about my policies and what I will do to represent them, it's all about the local issues. It's all about making sure that government is delivering the services and resources that we, and ensuring that government is doing its job. And so a lot of what I talk about is around the issues that people care about, around housing, around healthcare, around public safety, and making sure that people feel, see themselves with a future for themselves and for their families in the community. And I think there's a lot of focus on labeling in definitions of things, your issues and your stance on things. But at the end of the day, it's really about how are you going to serve the community. And so when I think about my leadership and how I will continue to represent this district, it's really about like, what are the important issues for my district now? How do I help solve these problems using all of the toolbox of government and legislation to do that?
Great. And just to follow up, Grace, I mean, I understand about, identity politics not being that, but, you do, you're running in a district that actually has many more Chinese constituents than Koreans. And so you've had this sort of interesting challenge of appealing to a voter base who played a large part in electing your predecessor, Yulin Liu, who is a woman of Chinese descent. So what lessons did you learn from your first campaign that you applied to this one in order to be successful?
So, I think, as Kyung said, that I ran once before and was not successful, and ran again the second time and was able to win. And a lot of that is really, focusing on the reasons for running, which is to serve the community. And so after my first race, and this is a great lesson for any young, aspiring, young person who wants to run for office, sometimes you don't win your first race. And but it's worth taking the risk and putting yourself out there. But the reason I ran was as a mother, fighting a very local environmental issue in my neighborhood, and wanting to make sure that my children and all the children in the neighborhood could go to school safely, without threat of being exposed to toxic chemicals from a site that was contaminated. And, I continued that work. It wasn't about me running for office. This was about making sure that our community, our neighborhood had someone who represented the local issues that were important to them. And so after I ran the first time, I continued to work on those issues and to work on other issues that were really important to the district, including work on the jail, fighting a jail in Chinatown, as well as, fighting for deaf tenants' rights in the Lower East Side. So, I would just say, it is, some of the identity politics do perhaps play into a campaign, but also, I received a lot of support from the Latino community. I received a lot of support from the white community, and that's because I did the work. I was on the ground, and it wasn't about who I was as an Asian American. It was about the work that I was doing for every community in my district. And so, and I think that that's really important to our story, not only that we are Asian Americans, and there is a lot of work, and I'm sure you'll talk about what our priorities are as Asian American electeds to serve our Asian American communities, but also transcending that, and for people to see us as just community leaders beyond who we are, in our race or ethnic background.
Great, thank you so much. And now, switching gears, I want to turn to U.S.-Korea relations. And as already we've talked a bit about the fact that Korea has arguably suffered from American foreign policy decisions throughout history. And, just even in more recent times when President Jimmy Carter unilaterally threatened to withdraw all US troops from Korea. That was back in 1977. And as recently as the previous administration, there have been talks about revisiting the US troop withdrawal from Korea, ceasing joint military exercises, just to also, recalibrating financial obligations of joint security. So my question to all of the panelists is, at the state level, what would you do to represent the voices of Americans of Korean descent to help shape US-Korea policy that moves away from threats of unilateral actions by the US? Sam, I see you nodding your head. Do you want to start with that?
Sure. So there's two things that immediately come to mind, but one is continuing to build upon and strengthen economic relations between the state of Georgia and the Republic of Korea. Recently, Hyundai announced a $5 billion investment in and around the Port of Savannah. We have a multi-billion-dollar investment from SK Innovation, about 30 minutes from where I live, and another large multi-billion-dollar investment from Kia on the border of Georgia and Alabama. So there's a great opportunity for one to continue to build the economic relationship that exists between the state and the Republic of Korea. But along with that, I think is also continuing at the state level to demonstrate support for democratic values and human rights. And so certainly we can do that by ensuring that Korean Americans who live in Georgia have an opportunity to vote without issue, without barriers, and also have an opportunity to, especially as the community continues to grow, to have a seat, a real seat at the table, not one of proximity, but one which they can embrace and be proud of both their American identity and their Korean identity. Going to our prior conversation, in which I'll always remember an important lifelong lesson I learned when I visited Hawaii, in which I learned about Colonel Young Ok Kim, in which he said, "I'm proud to be 100% American and proud to be 100% Korean." And so at the state level, while we don't engage often in foreign policy, certainly when it comes to national security, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us at the subnational level to build and strengthen relations, but certainly when it comes to democratic principles and values that we can make clear we are demonstrating at home as well as abroad.
Thank you.
And it is really about relationships. And Sam and I have had the fortune of attending what's known as the Overseas Korean Politicians Forum. And through that, you get to engage a lot with other Korean, not just Korean American politicians, but national or international Korean descent politician, and you get to share ideas and share relationship. And within the states, all the states have different sister state relationship with other countries. So for Hawaii, because of our immigrant background and because the first wave of Koreans came to Hawaii, we have a sister state relationship with Incheon. We also have a sister state relationship with Busan, I believe. I think within the state itself, we can also push those relationships. It is not, I think it's, for each of us, it is a great amount of encouragement and, with awe that there's so many Korean Americans running in the federal levels as well. And we have record amount of leaders in Congress. And hopefully one of you folks will be our future senator, so you can be the first of Korean American descent in the US Senate as well. But I'm very encouraged that so many Korean Americans are a member of Congress.
Thank you. Any other comments from, yeah, Jean?
I'll try to be concise. Wave my hands if I'm run on top. Wave your hand, okay?
Great.
the thing is, Korea's in the game now. The great game. If you talk, there's this phrase, the great game of international geopolitics. What is the world order? Who's going to be on top? What controls the future of society, of the planet? Korea's in the game whether they want to be or not, right? For almost the entire history, Korea's just geographical position meant that it was just always between the great powers of Japan and China. That's just been the story. And now for the last 80 or so years, it's between those three and the United States. There isn't really a way for the relationship between the US and Korea to degrade. It has to maintain strong. It's in both countries' national interests. So if you ask what state legislators can do, well, I mean, every state legislator should be competing to welcome in the Korean investment dollars, which the US government will make available because they have to. That's the reality of geopolitics right now and today. And it's going to continue to be this way probably for the next 100 years. So, yeah.
Great. And I think, Sue, you had your hand up as well.
I'll make it very short too.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to share is that, my dad did work for the US Army, but he was always nervous in the 1970s that North Korea will invade anytime. I mean, there was that scare, real scare. And that's one of the reasons why we immigrated to America also. Two things, both America and Korea was founded upon a constitution that's very similar. And that's how we have come this far. Upholding the constitution in both nations is very important. The relationship that we have with Korea, and of course, that's my mother country. I was born there. The relationship between Korea and America is so crucial. To maintain a strong, good relationship is so important. And to make sure that US Army have its presence in Korea is so important. Because out of all the powerhouses, Russia, China, and Japan, US is our ally, and it's proven through history. So I just want to share that is how a lot of the first generation Koreans feel, and they really appreciate, the Christianity, the missionaries that came to Korea and helped build schools and churches and hospitals, universities when Korea was at the bottom. And we immigrated. They helped so many of the Korean independent movers like, An Chang-ho and Lee Seung-man. It was the missionaries who helped them launch and come and study, in Hawaii and in US. So I just wanted to put that word out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And you just mentioned Americans and missionaries who made a difference in Korea. Let's turn that around. And can you, I'm just going to ask all the panelists, can you name a Korean American who is not a family member, who has made the most notable contribution to the United States and to whom you look for inspiration? Jean, you want to take that?
I'm just going to take this opportunity to promote the first Korean American novelist in existence. His name is Young-hil Kang. Kang, I guess he would pronounce it, Young-hil Kang, because he completely Americanized. He came over to the United States, I believe, in the early 1920s or so. At this point, he had decided, well, Korea is going to cease to exist. I mean, they'd just become, in the last decade or so, occupied by Japan, figured Korea was gone forever as a country. So came over here as a young adult, landed in New York City. Can you imagine? In New York City, this young Korean guy trying to be American. And he wrote this novel about it, which is incredible, called East Goes West. It's an inspiration every time I look at that book. I encourage everyone to read it. Young-hil Kang.
Great. I'm going to pick that up. Thank you. Anyone else who would like to name a Korean American that they see as having made an impact in the US? Sue?
Yes, I'm just trying to think of 목사님's name. He's 영락교회 in LA, and not only him, he went to North Korea. He was born in North Korea, 영락교회 초대 목사님. And all the pastors, I have to say they're a champion for immigrants because they're the ones when new immigrants arrived at the time, no social worker, no English. They picked them up from the airport, helped the family settle down. help them get the driver license, and just they are champions. They are champions. We don't acknowledge them as much, but they are champions. Yeah.
Great.
I'll mention Colonel Young Kim,
Yeah.
who was the first Asian American to ever lead a U.S. battalion. And again, it's that saying which certainly helps me with my identity as a Korean American, of that you have the ability and the freedom to embrace both. And certainly, if this is the land of the free, we ought to have an opportunity to embrace and celebrate our diversity as well. The other person I'll throw out there is Sylvia Lu.
Oh, I was gonna say you, Sam. But I think we look at each other as inspirations, and because there was a break in immigration from our immigrant forefathers who came in the 1900s to the recent immigrants. I look towards people like Ron Moon, who was a Supreme Court justice in the state of Hawaii. And he was, I believe, third generation Korean. And then we also have Harry Kim, who is a mayor, who was a mayor of one of the counties. And he's looked upon by not just Koreans, but state in general, as somebody who is just so humble and so honorable in his role.
Thank you. And Grace, I saw you kind of racking your brain a little bit when I asked the question.
I think for me, it's just any Korean American who has come before me and helped to pave the way for me to be able to run for office. As Sylvia said, all of the panelists on here have really inspired me, but I'll name some other, Suki Kang, who's here today, who ran for office, who also was, held elected office, June Choi in New Jersey, Kevin Kim, who ran but did not win, but is, holds a really high position in the New York City's administration now, as well as Ron Kim, who is a state assembly member who is currently a state assembly member. So just really grateful to everyone who's helped to, pave the way and, shape and make it possible for people like me to run.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And my next question, it's not assuming that you would be, this would be the first thing that you would do, but if elected, do you see, what would be the area in terms of first bill or a piece of legislation that would touch on improving the lives of Korean Americans, that a bill that you would introduce, and why? And Sam, maybe you've already been there. You've already been in office, and so maybe you could start with this.
Sure. So I first ran for office back in 2016 and won the very same night that Trump was elected, but not because I was trying to make history and not because of my identity. It was to try and make progress on a public policy issue that I cared very deeply about, which was access to healthcare. Georgia is one of 12 states in the country that has not expanded Medicaid, leaving more than 500,000 Georgians without access to healthcare. We have the second highest uninsured rate. Unfortunately, Georgia is one of the most dangerous states in the nation for a Black woman to have a child. We have an opioid epidemic, mental health crises. I think 47th in the state for mental health access. And I think we rank number 1 in the nation for new HIV diagnoses, despite the fact that we are also the home of the CDC. And so I ran for office, 6 years ago to expand Medicaid after Republicans made it harder to ensure all Georgians could have access to healthcare. And it's an issue I'm still unfortunately trying to make progress on. And in Georgia, we also have a lot of Korean Americans who are uninsured, coupled with, unfortunately, some of the xenophobic positions taken by folks in leadership. There's fear to get help when needed. And so I think a lot of progress needs to be made, but number 1, without a doubt, is expanding access to healthcare.
Thank you. Sue, if elected, what would you see as the first bill or piece of legislation specifically for Korean Americans that you would introduce, and why?
Did you call my name?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
sure, thank you. You know, being in the education and working with kids, really, I would like to repeal some of the bills, mandates, teaching the comprehensive sex ed, the gender identity. It causes so much confusion. I would like to repeal those bills. And all the bills, California is the other opposite of Sam shared. It's one party, 100% is left, all Democrat. 75% is all Democrat. So like all these bills that's passing is way too liberal for my district, which makes up 32% Asian, 30% Latino. And many parents are in uproar because we are dealing with children being indoctrinated. And so the crime rose by 10% in the last 10 years, homelessness 20%. And now we are dealing with drug problems, the overdose of fentanyl and all the legalization of marijuana. It's causing our schools and parenting so difficult. And with these mandates, parents, they're pulling the kids out of public school. We have a huge decline of enrollment for many factors, but that is one of the major factors. So these are laws that I would like to repeal. And another big one, in the last 10 years or more, the college admission has been extremely difficult for Asians. So even with the perfect SAT scores, you just can't get into the top schools, top UCs. So the parents are, looking for schools outside of state. I believe we do need to give opportunity for underrepresented students, but for the Asian students, something has to be done that's balanced. And the parents are very discouraged and almost demoralized. It's like, why work so hard? We can't get into the college of our choice. So those are some of the things I would definitely like to see done, and fully fund the police, because we need to have a safe street and schools. Like this year, our campuses, we have to dispatch 2 additional security officers in each campus because of the rise of crime and gang activity. So these are some of the things I feel, and regardless of the political party, this is not working for our kids, for our family. Yeah, and that's why we have California exodus. But I'm fighting to stay in California and retire here.
Anyone else? Jean? Well,
I tried to just let that go, but you called my name, so I'll say the little bit that I had to say about this, which is just, I don't want to campaign. The rules of this webinar here are to not campaign, and so without describing my platform, what I would say is I tried very hard to think of things that I thought were universally good policies to repair what I think is wrong with my district and my state. And so just in that word, universal, I obviously can't say that I specifically am looking to do things for Korean Americans. It's not just that there are some very, very vanishingly small percentage of the district. It's that I personally didn't want to think that way, campaign that way, or just be that way. I'm not criticizing anyone else who does. Okay, so I'm not trying to start an ideological fight here, but to me personally, if what I'm trying to do is unite people in what I see as a fractured society, we have to think about the things that help all of us equally, help all of us in a way that we think of each other as part of the same unit, and rather than starting from the assumption that we're different and will automatically follow our demographic lines. So I object to the question.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, which is why I prefaced the question that this may not be something, but if you were, but absolutely, point well taken. So thank you. And I don't know, Sylvia or Grace, if maybe we can move on just, to another question. Or Grace, did you have something that you wanted to say?
I'll just say I think Jean is right in certain ways that, again, like we talk about, like transcending our identity, but also I feel a very deep responsibility as one of the few Asian American, soon to be state legislators in the state of New York, to also make sure that Asian American communities have a voice at the table through policy and legislation. So it's not something that I necessarily lead with, but once I am in the state legislature, I fully intend on helping to represent the greater Asian American community and the Korean American community. And one way we can do that is not just through legislation, but also through the budget. And New York State has a $200 billion budget. The Asian American community is the fastest growing minority group in New York State. Yet, we only get about 2% of funding to our communities. So, we are making great strides in trying to get more funding to our communities for simple things like mental health care, supportive housing, and other senior services, and language and culturally accessible services to our communities. And, I will continue to fight to make sure that the Asian American community gets their fair share as well.
Great, thank you. Sylvia, if you want to add anything.
As Lieutenant Governor, where we don't introduce bills, we can request the legislature to introduce bills. What I'm planning to do is work with the governor to specifically figure out what are some of my roles and responsibilities. We do have some agreement with the gubernatorial candidate that I'll be leading the effort in expanding preschool access. Currently in the state of Hawaii, only 50% of our 3 and 4-year-olds have access to early learning. And so I will be working to expand that out to, anyone who would like their 3 and 4-year-olds have a preschool education. I will be working on preschool expansion. In addition to that, I think what we learned during COVID was that broadband is not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's not only for educational equity, but also for workforce and for healthcare responses as well, especially in our rural areas where we don't have enough doctors and healthcare professionals. We need broadband, reliable broadband, to make sure that you have telehealth and telecommunication. So I will also be working on broadband expansion, especially in a time where the federal government has provided so much funding for broadband expansion.
Great, thank you. And so just as a wrap-up question, it's very short, and just for all the panelists, predict the year that an American of Korean descent gets elected to the White House. Let's start with Jean.
Well, I'm just gonna whoever's older is between Sam and Grace. I'm just gonna subtract 35 and figure, like, when you guys get old enough, right? I think I'm a little too late to the game, but I see this great generation coming up in the younger years, and I think it's fantastic. You guys, when you're sort of the core sort of presidential age, I feel like either one of you could be a great candidate and run.
Great. So, Sam, what are you running?
I have no intention of running for president at this moment. For me, I'm trying to do as much good with the opportunities I've been given. Again, I never thought I'd be in office to begin with. And my number one focus right now is to elect a new governor who will take action to expand access to healthcare, fully invest in education, and protect the right to vote. So we'll see where life takes me. I'm happy to be of service. I think whoever will be the first Korean American to serve as president of the United States will have to kind of do what we've been talking about, of building a broad-based coalition, focus on values and issues that transcend background, while at the same time, celebrating and embracing our diversity, recognizing that that's one of the beauties of this country, in which we are a nation of immigrants, in which we're still continuing to perfect what our union looks like, and continuing to try and live up to that promise of America to make sure that that promise is made real for all. But yeah, I look forward to seeing who that person may be as well.
Yeah, but no one's answering my question here. Like, what's the year? Come on.
I don't know. That's a hard question.
What was your question? What's the year we're
No,
gonna have?
the question is, yes, what is the year do you predict that an American of Korean descent will take their furniture into the White House?
Mhm. How about 2035?
2035, okay.
Yeah, it gives us about a little bit over 10 years to prepare and pave the road, because I know that as an immigrant, Korean American, one thing that I would go back and do is to teach government and patriotism. That's one thing that we really missed. I taught the kids to be academically, do well on SAT, get perfect score, be a good Christian, strong, good person, work hard, but didn't kind of missed out on government. Kind of assumed that they would learn it in school. They didn't. You know, you go off to college and you don't really learn the truth and the foundation. But, you know, it's about really learning the truth, you know, loving God, love your family.
So Sue, I'm sorry, but you know, it's my job as a moderator
Yes,
to keep
I know.
on track. And I think, and so
So-
we will need to answer my question. And
we are pushing that now.
you said
Now,
2035. Sylvia, what's your prediction of when an American of Korean descent will
Well,
get
you know,
into the White House?
as a nation, we made so much strides in making a lot of progress, you know, in terms of women's rights, voting rights, civil rights. Just in the last year, you know, I've just been really disappointed with where the nation was going and how, you know, for the first time, our rights are being taken away. And so I think, you know, we have a lot to go, you know. I mean, even as women, I think Grace and Sue will agree, you know, even as women in running for office, it's hard, and we have struggles that you know, people will have, you know, people will give our male colleagues a leg up on certain things. And you know, if you are LGBT community, or you know, minorities, or you know, you continue to have struggles. So I think you know, I'm hopeful that it happens within my lifetime. But like Jean, I'm 50s, and you know, time is a ticking. But we have a long way to go. But I see progress, and hopefully we can get over the recent hiccups.
Great. How about you, Grace?
Oh, I'd love to see it in my generation, in our generation. But you know, even if we don't, I'd love to see one of my daughters run for office one day. So no, yeah, no, I think let's just put it out into the atmosphere. Let's say 2030. Let's go earlier than that.
all right.
We got a decade. Let's get going. Sam, I'm looking at you.
Thank you all so much. And I just want to say it's been such a eye-opening and kind of mind-opening conversation for me to be hearing from where each of you are coming from. But I just feel like, you know, we all are Korean Americans, and that is part of our identity. But what I'm taking away from this conversation, that it's not solely about leading with a Korean American identity. It's really about what we can do to transcend differences, and really, but without losing, you know, an important part of who we are. And I think to Grace's point about trying to use that place and power to help our community, which has often been very invisible and voiceless. And so through representation, through the budget process, the needs that might not be resourced or visible, and to think about fair share. I thought that was an important point. I really also liked the point about it's not about labels, you know, like conservative or progressive, that it's a celebration in itself that more Korean Americans are running and getting a place at the table, ensuring political representation. And I do think it's so important. I remember years ago, for me, when I saw Connie Chung on television, it allowed a younger woman, Korean, Asian woman like me to even dream about like pursuing a career in broadcast journalism. And I think each of you are playing that role, by, so in every way, that by just, being there and exerting the kind of leadership and just your voices are so important to inspire the next generation. And then finally, I think I heard, that it's just inevitable about US-Korea relations, that it's not if or what, but, that they must stay strong, as Jean said. And, and every state legislator can play a role in building bridges and attracting more Korean investments in manufacturing or commerce. And also, I heard about, the sister city relationships and what Sylvia said about relationships being really, really important. And I think that is also a role that each of you can play. And I guess finally, that it's not if, but when an American of Korean descent will be elected to the White House. And I hope that I will be able to see that. And Grace, I hope that one of your daughters will make us proud, if not you yourself. And as I said at the outset, there is a lot of attention on the White House, but it's not just the White House. That's not the ultimate goal. It is exactly what each of you are doing and just building that strong pipeline of voice and representation and leadership, and just whether or not, it's like, like the presidency, that's great. But I think we're already there in many ways. So I really want to thank each and every one of you and for this conversation today. And I also have a few other people to thank as we're wrapping up. We want to thank Suk-hee Kang, of course, the chair of the board of CAPA, and the board and the advisory board members of CAPA, in particular, John Lim and Andy Kim, who's the general counsel, and of course, David Kim. And also, we want to recognize Vincent Eng of the Beng Group for his technical assistance and all his guidance. And also, I want to thank our supporting organizations, the Council of Korean Americans, the Korean American Coalition, and the Korean American Association of Greater New York, CAGNY. I also want to lift up the Gimga Group and my friend Mihae Kim Stefani for their design assistance. And finally, this webinar, as you were, just to remind you, was made possible in part by the generous support of BCD Tofu House, H-Mart, I think I heard earlier, and the members of CAPA. And so please do go to the CAPA website and join as members, because member support allows CAPA to create and produce programming like today's webinar. So I just want to thank everyone who participated today for just, being this standout leaders. I want to thank all of you who tuned in as well. And together, we can really lift up our voices and our visibility and representation. So thank you and have a good night.